The cold marble of the staircase felt like a monument to his mistakes. Each polished step was a reminder of a life he had meticulously built, a life that was now threatened by the woman standing at the top, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach. Amelia Vance, her name, once a sweet whisper in the dark, had become a screeching alarm in his head. Her eyes, once pools of adoration, were now filled with a righteous fire that promised to burn his carefully constructed world to ash. He had offered her money, a fortune that would let her and the child live in luxury anywhere in the world. He had pleaded, then reasoned, then threatened. But Amelia's resolve was as unyielding as the stone beneath their feet. She didn't want his money, she wanted him. She wanted the life he had promised to another. Marcus Thorne adjusted the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt, the silk a stark contrast to the icy sweat prickling his skin. "Amelia, you have to be reasonable," he said, his voice a low, placating hum that had charmed boardrooms and swayed investors. "This changes nothing for Victoria and me. This situation is a problem we can solve. Discreetly." "A problem?" Amelia's laugh was sharp, brittle. "You call our child a problem? I'm not a business deal you can liquidate, Marcus. I'm not some unfortunate expense you can write off." She took a step down, her presence seeming to fill the cavernous foyer of his empty mansion. He had made the mistake of agreeing to meet her here, on neutral ground he thought he controlled. He was wrong. "You knew the terms," he shot back, his patience fraying. "We were casual. Fun. You knew I was with Victoria." "And you knew I wasn't on birth control," she countered, her voice rising. "You didn't seem to mind then. You told me you loved me, Marcus. You whispered it to me in the dark while your fiancée was sleeping in her own penthouse across town." Each word was a hammer blow against the fragile facade of his future. He saw it all slipping away. Victoria Davenport, the heiress to a global shipping empire. Her father, Alistair, whose approval was his golden ticket into a world of unimaginable power. The wedding that was less a ceremony and more a coronation. All of it, threatened by this ghost from his past, carrying a future he refused to acknowledge. "That was a mistake," he hissed, the charm evaporating, revealing the cold, hard man beneath. "And it's one you will not use to ruin my life." "Our life, Marcus. This is your son, she cried, her hand pressing harder against her belly. "He deserves a father. He deserves to know who he is." "He will have everything he needs," Marcus said, stepping towards the base of the grand, sweeping staircase. "A trust fund, the best schools, he will never want for anything. But he will not have me, and he will not have my name." Tears streamed down Amelia's face, a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "You're a monster. I'll tell them. I'll tell everyone. I'll go to Victoria. I'll go to her father. I'll show them the emails, the texts. I'll tell them how you begged me not to leave, how you said you were trapped. They will see you for the coward you are." Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. She could do it. She had the proof. Alistair Davenport was a man who valued loyalty and strength above all else. He did not tolerate weakness. He did not tolerate scandal. A messy public affair with a pregnant ex-girlfriend was not just an embarrassment. It was a fatal flaw, a liability he would sever without a second thought. "You won't," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "Watch me," Amelia spat, turning to descend the stairs, her phone already in her hand. In that moment, the world narrowed to a single point. The polished wood of the banister, the defiant set of her shoulders, the phone that held his ruin. It wasn't a thought, not a conscious decision. It was an impulse, a primal instinct for survival that bypassed all reason, all morality. He lunged forward, his feet silent on the plush runner. His hands made contact with her back. It was not a violent shove, but a firm, deliberate push. A transfer of momentum, an act of erasure. Amelia's cry was a strangled gasp, cut short as she tumbled forward. The sound was horrifying, a sickening series of thuds, a crack of bone against marble, and then a final heavy silence. Her body lay twisted at the bottom of the stairs, a broken doll in a designer dress. Her phone had skittered across the floor, its screen shattered but still glowing faintly. The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. It was deeper than quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air from his lungs. For a long second, Marcus stood frozen, his hands still outstretched, tingling with the phantom sensation of the push. He looked down at the still form of Amelia, at the life he had just extinguished, and the other life that had been extinguished with it. There was no remorse. There was no grief. There was only the cold, sharp clarity of a problem solved. He took a deep, steadying breath, the practiced calm of a crisis manager taking over. He walked slowly down the stairs, his expensive shoes carefully avoiding the spreading pool of blood. He picked up her phone, the screen flickering with a half-typed message to Victoria. He slipped it into his pocket. He then backed away, widening his eyes, composing his face into a mask of horror and disbelief. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers surprisingly steady as he dialed 911. "My ex-girlfriend," he choked out, injecting a perfect tremor of panic into his voice. "She's fallen. Oh God, she fell down the stairs. She's pregnant. Please, you have to hurry. There's so much blood." He had solved the problem. Now he just had to sell the story. The wail of sirens sliced through the manicured tranquility of the neighborhood, a sound that made the curtains of the neighboring mansions twitch. Marcus stood on his porch, his arms wrapped around himself, shivering in the cool evening air. He had pulled on the persona of a man in shock as easily as he had pulled on his cashmere coat. He watched the paramedics work frantically, their movements urgent but ultimately futile. He knew. The police arrived next, their cars blocking the cobblestone driveway. A detective, a man whose weary eyes seemed to have seen every flavor of human depravity, separated himself from the uniformed officers. He was older, with a rumpled suit and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Detective Frank Harding," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Can you tell me what happened?" Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, letting it fall in a convincing state of disarray. We were talking. Arguing," he began, his voice cracking. "She was at the top of the stairs. She was so upset. She turned. I think her heel caught on the runner. It happened so fast, she just tumbled." He buried his face in his hands, a dry, racking sob shaking his shoulders. It was a masterful performance. Harding watched him, his expression unreadable. "Arguing about what?" "The baby," Marcus admitted, looking up as if the confession pained him. "It's mine. I wanted to do the right thing, provide for them, but my life is complicated. I'm engaged." Amelia wasn't happy with the arrangement. She was emotional. He was painting a picture, the hysterical, unstable woman, the tragic, unavoidable accident. "I see," Harding said, his gaze drifting from Marcus to the open doorway, where the forensics team was now meticulously working the scene. "So you were standing at the bottom of the stairs when she fell?" "Yes, right there," Marcus said, pointing with a trembling finger. "I tried to catch her. I wasn't fast enough." Another lie, layered seamlessly onto the first. Harding made a note in his small dog-eared pad. "We'll need a formal statement down at the station, Mr. Thorne, once you feel up to it." "Of course, Detective. Anything to help," Marcus said, the perfect cooperative victim of circumstance. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, hushed voices, and the sterile environment of the police precinct. Marcus recounted his story again and again, each telling identical to the last, the details polished and smooth like a river stone. He was careful, precise, giving them nothing to question. He spoke of his love for his fiancée, Victoria, and his deep regret over the terrible accident that had befallen Amelia. He was the picture of a man caught in a tragic drama, not the author of it. Detective Harding listened patiently, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. He let the silence stretch after each answer, a classic interrogation technique designed to make a man uncomfortable, to make him talk more, to make him slip. But Marcus was a master of controlling the narrative. He didn't slip. "Just a few more things, Mr. Thorne," Harding said, leaning forward. "You said you came straight here to meet her. Where were you before that?" "I was at my office. A late meeting," Marcus replied smoothly. He had prepared for this. "It ran until about 7:30. I have my keycard logs and a dozen witnesses who can confirm it. And after the meeting, I drove straight here. It took about 40 minutes in traffic." "Did you stop anywhere?" Harding asked, his tone casual. A flicker of a memory. A quick stop at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop for a black Americano to steady his nerves before the confrontation. It was insignificant, a non-event. To mention it would be to introduce a needless complication. "No, straight here," Marcus said with firm finality. Harding nodded slowly, making another note. "And Ms. Vance's phone. We haven't been able to locate it at the scene. Did you see what happened to it?" The phone, the one piece of evidence he hadn't accounted for in the heat of the moment. He had it, tucked away in the inside pocket of his coat, a cold, hard rectangle against his chest. He couldn't produce it now. They would find the half-written text. He couldn't say he had seen it. They would ask why he hadn't mentioned it. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "Everything was chaos. It must have been thrown when she fell. Maybe it's under a piece of furniture." "Perhaps," Harding said, closing his notepad. "We'll have our people do another sweep. You're free to go for now, Mr. Thorne. We'll be in touch." As Marcus walked out into the cool night air, a wave of relief washed over him. He had done it. He had weathered the first storm. He was a prominent businessman, engaged to a Davenport. They had no proof, only the word of a grieving man against the tragic clumsiness of a pregnant woman. It was his word against a ghost's. He drove to Victoria's penthouse, the city lights blurring past him. He needed to see her, to anchor himself in the reality he had fought so hard to protect. He rehearsed his lines, the sorrowful confession of an old affair and a tragic accident. Victoria would be hurt, of course, but she would forgive him. Her father would be angry, but he would see that Marcus had handled the problem. He found Victoria in the living room, staring out at the glittering skyline, a glass of wine in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight, "someone from the police called my father. They told him there was an accident at your house. They said a woman died." "Victoria, my love," he began, rushing to her side, his face a mask of anguish. "There's something I have to tell you. Something terrible has happened." He told her his version of the story, a curated narrative of regret and tragedy. He held her as she cried, her tears soaking his shirt. He was a rock, a comfort, the man who would guide them through this awful time. But as he held her, a cold thought intruded on his victory. Detective Harding's eyes. They weren't sympathetic. They weren't gullible. They were the eyes of a hunter who had caught a scent. And Marcus knew, with a sudden chilling certainty, that this was far from over. The detective was a problem he hadn't yet solved. The first crack in Marcus's fortress of lies came from a woman named Chloe Sanders. She was Amelia's best friend, a fiery art gallery curator with eyes that held the same righteous blaze he had last seen in Amelia's. She stormed into the police precinct 2 days after the incident, demanding to speak with the detective in charge. Detective Harding met her in a small, quiet interview room. She was clutching a worn, leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady and laced with venom. "He's lying," she said before Harding could even introduce himself. "Marcus Thorne is a liar and a monster, and he killed her. Amelia would never have just fallen." Harding let her speak, his pen poised over his notepad. "Ms. Sanders, I understand you're upset." "Upset? I'm incandescent," she snapped. Amelia was meticulous. She was a dancer for 10 years before she became a paralegal. She had the grace of a cat. She didn't trip on a runner, not unless she was pushed. Chloe pushed the journal across the table. "This is her diary. She wrote in it every day. The last few months are all about Marcus. Read it. Read about how he threatened her, how he told her he would make this problem go away. He called the baby it. He told her if she went to his fiancé, he would ruin her, that she would never see a dime, and he'd make sure she was painted as an unstable gold digger." Harding opened the journal. The pages were filled with Amelia's elegant looping script. He read entry after entry, detailing Marcus's escalating panic and cruelty. The words painted a portrait of a man a world away from the grieving, regretful fiancé he had interviewed. This was a portrait of a cold, calculating predator. "She was afraid of him," Chloe continued, her voice thick with emotion. "The day she died, she texted me before she went to his house. She said, 'Going to tell Marcus I'm not taking the money. I'm going to tell Victoria everything. If something happens to me, it was him.' I have the text on my phone, detective." This was it. This was the first real fissure. It wasn't physical evidence, but it was powerful motive and intent. Harding felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. He now had a narrative to counter Marcus's story of a tragic accident. Meanwhile, Marcus was in damage control mode. The story had been leaked to a few gossip columns. Tragedy strikes fiancé of Davenport heiress. But the Davenport PR machine, under the iron-fisted direction of Alistair, had managed to keep it contained. The official story was that a dear old friend of Marcus's had suffered a terrible fall. The pregnancy was not mentioned. Alistair Davenport had summoned Marcus to his penthouse office, a sterile space of glass and steel overlooking the entire city. Alistair was a man who radiated power. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and possessed a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. "This is a mess, Marcus," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't look at Marcus, but at the city below as if it were his personal chessboard. "A deeply unpleasant public mess." "I know, Alistair. I am so sorry Victoria has to go through this," Marcus said, striking a tone of deep contrition. "It was a freak accident. The police have already questioned me. There's nothing to it." Alistair turned his head slowly, his cold blue eyes pinning Marcus in place. "There is always something to it, Marcus. There are no accidents, only failures of planning and execution. This woman, this Amelia Vance, she was pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Marcus felt a chill. Of course they would know. The Davenports had resources that went far beyond public records. "Yes," Marcus admitted, "the child was mine. I was prepared to handle it financially, to ensure she and the child were taken care of for life, discreetly." Discreetly, Alistair repeated the word as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. "And yet, she ended up dead at the bottom of your staircase. That is the opposite of discreet. It is loud, it is vulgar." He walked over to his desk and picked up a thin file. "We ran a preliminary background check. On you, Marcus. We do it for everyone who gets close to Victoria." He tossed the file onto the desk. It landed with a soft thud. "You have a pattern. Women who become inconvenient. A college girlfriend who suddenly dropped out after an incident. A junior associate at your first firm who signed an NDA and moved to another country. You have a talent for making your problems disappear. But you have become sloppy." Marcus's blood ran cold. He had buried those incidents so deep, he had almost forgotten them himself. "Those were misunderstandings," Marcus stammered, his composure beginning to crack. "I am not interested in your misunderstandings," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am interested in protecting my daughter and my family's name. The police are sniffing around. This Detective Harding is tenacious. He used to be on the organized crime task force. He is not some beat cop you can charm with a sad story. You need to fix this. Make it go away. Permanently." The implication was clear. Alistair didn't care if Marcus was guilty or innocent. He cared only about the outcome. The scandal had to be contained, and Marcus was the one holding the leash. Feeling the pressure from both the police and the Davenports, Marcus focused on his alibi. He called his office manager to ensure the keycard logs were in order. He made a list of the people in the late-night meeting, ready to have them vouch for his presence. He felt secure. His timeline was solid. But Detective Harding wasn't looking at his alibi. He was looking at the gaps. He pulled Marcus's financials and cell phone records. The credit card charge was small, almost insignificant. A $4.50 charge at 7:48 p.m. on the night of Amelia's death. The establishment, the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop 3 blocks from Marcus's office, but crucially in the opposite direction of his mansion. Harding then pulled the cell tower data. Marcus's phone had pinged a tower near that coffee shop at 7:51 p.m., and then, for the next 20 minutes, it pinged towers along a route that was not the most direct way to his home. It was a scenic route, one that added 15 minutes to the journey. 15 minutes that were unaccounted for in his statement. Why would a man in a hurry to get to a tense meeting with his pregnant ex-girlfriend take the scenic route? Why would he lie about something as trivial as stopping for coffee? Harding leaned back in his chair, a grim smile on his face. Liars always made the same mistake. They focused on constructing the big lies, but they always got tripped up by the small, insignificant truths. He sent a uniform to the Daily Grind to see if they had security cameras. He already knew what he was going to find. He was going to find a picture of Marcus Thorne, calm and composed, buying a coffee at a time he claimed he was already halfway across the city. The crack in the fortress was about to become a gaping hole. The photograph was grainy, taken from a high-angle security camera, but it was unmistakably Marcus Thorne. He stood at the counter of the daily grind, his expression placid as he paid the young waitress. The timestamp in the corner read 7:49 p.m. The receipt Harding had recovered from the credit card company confirmed the purchase of one large black Americano. Harding placed the photo on his desk next to Marcus's sworn statement. In the statement, Marcus claimed to have left his office at 7:30 p.m. and driven directly to his home, arriving just after 8:10 p.m. to meet Amelia. But the photo and the cell phone pings told a different story. A story of a 20-minute detour he had deliberately omitted. People lie for two reasons, Harding said to his partner, a young, eager detective named Miller. They lie to hide something big, or they lie because it's what they do. With this guy, I'm betting it's both. The story broke a day later. A source inside the department, frustrated with the perceived slow pace of the investigation and the influence of the Davenport name, leaked the existence of Amelia's journal and the suspicious timeline to a hungry reporter. The headline was explosive. Davenport heiress's fiancé lied to police in pregnant ex's death probe. The carefully managed narrative shattered. The floodgates opened. Reporters swarmed Marcus's mansion, his office, and the Davenport Tower. His face was plastered across every news channel, no longer the grieving partner, but the prime suspect. The word murder was now being whispered, then shouted. Marcus found himself a prisoner in Victoria's penthouse. The city that had once felt like his kingdom now felt like a cage. He watched himself being vilified on television, his carefully crafted image being torn to shreds. "Why did you lie, Marcus?" Victoria asked, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. She stood across the vast living room, the news playing on a giant screen behind her. She wasn't angry or sad anymore. She was cold, analytical, like her father. "It was nothing. A coffee," he said, trying to sound dismissive. "I was stressed before meeting her. I needed a minute to think. It was irrelevant, so I didn't mention it. The police are blowing this out of proportion. They have her journal, Marcus. They have texts. She said she was afraid of you. She said you threatened her. Was that irrelevant too?" "She was unstable," he yelled, his composure finally snapping. "She was trying to blackmail me, to destroy our life. I said things in anger, things I didn't mean. You can't possibly believe I would." He let the sentence hang, unable to voice the accusation. Victoria just stared at him, her expression unreadable. "My father wants to see you. In his office. Now." The walk to Alistair's office felt like a walk to the gallows. The man was not sitting behind his desk this time. He was standing with his back to the door, looking out at the storm clouds gathering over the city. "You have become more than a liability, Marcus," Alistair said without turning around. "You have become a threat to the family. A threat to my daughter. This story is out of control. Your face is now associated with the Davenport name in the context of murder." "I can fix this," Marcus pleaded, his voice desperate. "My lawyers are the best. We'll discredit the journal, paint Amelia as delusional. The timeline discrepancy is circumstantial at best." Alistair turned, his face a mask of cold fury. "Your lawyers. You think this is about lawyers and courtrooms. This is about perception, about power. You have shown catastrophic judgment. First, by engaging in this sordid affair. Second, by failing to control it. And third, by lying to the police in a way that has made us all look like fools." He walked towards Marcus, his presence suffocating. "I have built an empire on a foundation of strength and infallibility. You have dragged my daughter's name, my name, through the mud. This is no longer about your guilt or innocence in the eyes of the law. This is about your failure." "Alistair, I swear to you I did not kill her," Marcus lied, looking the powerful man directly in the eye. Alistair studied him for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "It no longer matters what I believe," he said finally. "It matters what the world believes. And right now, they believe you are a monster. You have failed to control the narrative. So now I will." He walked back to his desk and pressed an intercom button. "Send him in." The door opened and a man in a sharp, dark suit entered. He wasn't a lawyer. He was Alistair's head of security, a former intelligence officer named Kovich, a man who handled the problems that couldn't be solved with money. "Marcus, this is Mr. Kovich," Alistair said. "He is going to be your constant companion from now on. He will advise you on what to say, where to go, and who to speak to. You will not make a single move without his authorization. You are a component of a much larger machine now, and you will do exactly as you are told. Is that understood?" Marcus looked from Alistair's icy glare to Kovich's dead eyes. This wasn't help. This was a leash. He was no longer a future partner in the Davenport empire. He was a problem being managed. The walls were closing in, and the people he thought were his allies were now his wardens. That night, Detective Harding got another break. The waitress from the Daily Grind, a young college student named Sarah, finally responded to his request for an interview. She was nervous, but her memory was clear. "Yeah, I remember him," she said, looking at Marcus's photo. "He was weird, intense. He paid with his card, but then he asked me a strange question. He asked if we had a back exit." Harding leaned forward. "A back exit? Why?" "I don't know. I told him it was for employees only, that it led out to the alley. He just nodded and said, 'Good to know.' Then he left. He seemed really agitated, not calm like on the camera. He kept looking at his watch and rubbing the back of his neck. Rubbing the back of his neck. A nervous tick. A small detail, but another piece of the puzzle." Harding thanked the waitress and left. An idea was forming in his mind, a theory about those missing 20 minutes. Marcus wasn't just grabbing a coffee to calm his nerves. He was doing something else. He was creating a false alibi, but the coffee shop was just the first part of it. The detour, the back alley. It didn't make sense yet, but Harding knew it was important. He felt he was on the edge of a much darker truth, a truth that Marcus Thorne would go to any lengths to keep buried. The leash Alistair Davenport had put on Marcus was tight and unforgiving. Mr. Kovich was a silent shadow, always present, his eyes missing nothing. Marcus was moved from Victoria's penthouse to a secure Davenport-owned apartment. His phone calls were monitored, his meetings vetted. He was being isolated, cut off from the world, all under the guise of protection until the media storm died down. But Marcus knew it was a gilded cage. He tried to play the part of the compliant asset, following Kovich's instructions to the letter. He gave a carefully scripted press conference, his face a mask of sorrow, denying all allegations and pleading for privacy during his time of unimaginable grief. Victoria stood by his side, her hand in his, a perfect portrait of unwavering support. But her touch was cold, her eyes distant. She was playing a part, just as he was. It was a Davenport production, and they were the lead actors. Detective Harding, however, wasn't watching the press conference. He was in the forensics lab, staring at a set of enhanced satellite images. He had requested surveillance overheads of the city for the 20-minute window of Marcus's detour. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but his gut told him the key was in those missing minutes. "Here's his car," the tech said, pointing to a black sedan turning off the main road. "He pulls into the alley behind that block of shops, the one where the coffee shop is." Harding watched as the tiny car on the screen pulled up next to a dumpster. The driver's side door opened. A figure got out. The resolution wasn't good enough to make a positive ID, but the timing was perfect. The figure walked out of the alley and disappeared from view, presumably into the back entrance of one of the buildings. 10 minutes later, the figure reappeared, got back into the car and drove away, taking the longer scenic route home. "He didn't just stop for coffee," Harding murmured. "He parked in the alley, went somewhere for 10 minutes, then drove home a different way." Why? The answer came from an unexpected source, a low-level informant in the financial district trying to trade information for leniency on a minor charge mentioned a name: Julian Croft. Croft was a disgraced data recovery specialist, a digital ghost who, for the right price, could scrub histories, create false electronic trails, or clone phones. He operated out of a small, nondescript office in the same block as the Daily Grind, an office with a back entrance leading to the alley. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The missing phone, the detour, the lie about the coffee. Marcus hadn't gone for coffee to calm his nerves. The coffee was a cover, a time-stamped receipt to prove he was there. His real purpose was in that alley. He had gone to see Julian Croft. Harding knew what he would find. Marcus, in his arrogance, thought he was being clever. He had likely taken Amelia's phone to Croft to have it wiped clean of all the incriminating texts and emails Chloe had told them about. He probably intended to find it later, somewhere in his house, scrubbed of all evidence. But in his haste, he had created a new trail, a trail that led directly to a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. While Harding was building his case, Marcus was discovering the true nature of his gilded cage. Alistair called a meeting. It wasn't just Marcus, Alistair, and the ever-present Kovich. Victoria was there, along with the entire Davenport legal team. "The police have a warrant," Alistair began, his voice flat. "They're searching your house again, and your car. They also paid a visit to a Mr. Julian Croft, a data specialist. Does that name mean anything to you, Marcus?" Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Victoria, hoping for some sign of support, but her face was like stone. "He's a consultant I've used for business," Marcus lied, his voice weak. "Stop," Alistair commanded, his voice like a whip crack. "The time for your pathetic lies is over." "They found the phone, Marcus. Amelia's phone. Mr. Croft was not as discreet as you hoped. He kept a backup of the original data, a little insurance policy. He gave it all to Detective Harding in exchange for immunity. The texts, the emails, the voicemails where you threatened to bury her. It's all there." The room was silent. Marcus's carefully constructed world had not just cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. "But that is not our most pressing concern," Alistair continued, his gaze terrifyingly calm. "Mr. Croft's data backup contained something else. Something Amelia apparently copied from your laptop. Something that does not concern your tawdry affair, but concerns my business." He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a spreadsheet. A complex ledger of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and coded transactions. It was the heart of the Davenport's financial empire, the part that operated in the deep, murky shadows of international law. It was evidence of massive, systematic money laundering. "Amelia Vance wasn't just a paralegal," Alistair said softly, the words dripping with menace. "She was smart, too smart. She found this, she must have copied it, planning to use it as leverage against you. Her threats to go to Victoria and me. They weren't just about the baby. She was threatening to expose all of this." The truth hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. The push down the stairs, it wasn't just to save his marriage. It was to protect the Davenports. He had acted in that moment as their unwitting enforcer. He had solved a problem he didn't even fully understand. "You see, Marcus," Alistair said, a cruel smile touching his lips, "your problem has now become my problem, and I always solve my problems. The narrative is no longer about a tragic accident. It is no longer even about a crime of passion. The district attorney, who is a very dear friend of mine, has been persuaded to see this in a new light." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Marcus. "The new story is this. You were not just a cheating fiancé, you were an embezzler. You were siphoning money from our company, using this poor, pregnant woman as your accomplice. When she threatened to expose you, you silenced her. A simple, sordid tale of greed and murder, you acted alone. Your connection to our family was merely that of a failed executive who betrayed our trust." "No," Marcus whispered, shaking his head. "No, you can't." "I can," Alistair said. "The financial records will be altered to show your malfeasance. Key personnel will testify against you. You will be utterly and completely ruined. But the Davenport name will be cleared. The larger, our business, will remain untouched." Victoria finally spoke, her voice as cold as her father's. "It's for the best, Marcus. It's the only way to protect the family." He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, the woman for whom he had committed murder, and saw a stranger. He was not her partner. He was a disposable component. He had been so focused on outsmarting Detective Harding that he had never seen the real threat standing right beside him. He wasn't just going to prison. He was being erased. The interrogation room was smaller this time, the air thick with a sense of finality. The two-way mirror felt like the eye of a predator. Marcus sat alone at the metal table, the tailored suit provided by Kovich feeling like a costume for a play whose tragic ending was already written. He was no longer a person of interest. He was the designated villain. Detective Harding entered, but he wasn't alone. Behind him was a uniformed K9 officer and a magnificent, focused Belgian Malinois. The dog sat perfectly still, its intelligent eyes fixed on its handler, ignoring everything else in the room. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice betraying a tremor he couldn't control. "Why is there a dog here?" "Standard procedure, Mr. Thorne," Harding said calmly, sitting down opposite him. "We had a bomb threat called in. Precinct's on lockdown. Every room gets a sweep. Just ignore him." It was a lie, and Marcus knew it. There were no alarms, no sense of urgency in the building. This was theatre. It was a psychological ploy designed to rattle him. But why a dog? "We know everything, Marcus," Harding began, his voice soft, almost conversational. "We know about Julian Croft. We have the phone. We have the real timeline. We have the threats you made to Amelia. The story you built is gone." Marcus remained silent, his mind racing. Alistair's plan was already in motion. His own lawyers, Davenport lawyers, had told him to say nothing. They would argue that the evidence from Croft was inadmissible, that the journal was hearsay. They would build the new narrative of embezzlement. It was a long shot, but it was his only play. "I have nothing to say," Marcus stated, his voice flat. "I want to speak to my lawyer." "Oh, he's on his way," Harding said with a dismissive wave. "But we have a few minutes. I just want to understand the why of it. Not the lies, not the cover-up, but that moment. The moment you decided to push a pregnant woman down a flight of stairs. What were you thinking?" Marcus stared at the mirror, knowing the Davenports were likely watching. He had to stick to the script. "I told you. It was an accident." Harding sighed, a deep, weary sound. "You know, we found something interesting on Amelia's coat. A faint chemical trace. At first we thought it was perfume, but the lab identified it. It's a specialized pepper spray, but with a unique proprietary marking agent mixed in. The kind of thing a person might carry for self-defense. It's almost impossible to wash out completely, invisible to the naked eye, but it has a distinct scent. A scent so faint, a human nose would never catch it." Harding paused, his eyes flicking towards the dog. "But some noses are better than ours." The detective nodded to the K9 handler. The officer gave a quiet command. "Seek." The Malinois stood, its body taut with purpose. It moved with a silent, fluid grace, its nose twitching, sampling the air. It swept the room methodically, the table, the chairs, the corners. Then it turned its attention to Marcus. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dog moved closer, its wet nose hovering near his expensive shoes, his trousers, his jacket. He held his breath, praying it would find nothing. The dog continued its path upwards, its sniffing becoming more intense as it neared his torso. It reached his collar, its nose just inches from his throat. And then it stopped. It sat down hard, its body rigid, and stared directly at its handler, letting out a single sharp bark. The alert, panic, pure and primal, flooded Marcus's system. He remembered the struggle, brief as it was. Before he pushed her, she had turned, her hands flying up to defend herself. She must have had the pepper spray in her hand, the cap off. In that split second of contact, some of it must have transferred to his shirt, to the skin on his neck. An invisible stain that had now condemned him. "She fought back, didn't she, Marcus?" Harding's voice was a low, triumphant growl. "Just for a second. She tried to spray you, got it on you, right there, on your throat. That's the physical evidence we needed. That's the link that puts your hands on her. It's over." Marcus paled, the blood draining from his face. He looked like a ghost. All the lies, all the planning, all the arrogance, undone by a microscopic trace of chemicals and the sensitive nose of a dog. The door to the interrogation room opened. Marcus looked up, expecting to see his lawyer. But it wasn't his lawyer. It was Alistair Davenport. He walked into the room as if he owned it, radiating an aura of untouchable power. Mr. Kovich followed, closing the door behind them. Alistair didn't even glance at Marcus. He addressed Detective Harding directly. "Detective," Alistair said, his voice calm and authoritative, "a commendable piece of police work. You have found your man." Harding stood up, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Mr. Davenport, this is an active investigation. Your presence here is highly irregular." "Consider it a civic duty," Alistair replied smoothly. He then turned his cold, merciless eyes on Marcus. The look was not one of anger or disappointment. It was the look a man gives an insect before he crushes it. Marcus stared back, his mind screaming. This was it. This was the betrayal, complete and absolute. Alistair was here to personally deliver the final blow, to ensure the narrative he had constructed would stick. Alistair looked from Marcus's pale, terrified face to Detective Harding. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small room with a chilling finality. "Finish him." It wasn't a command to Kovich to draw a weapon, it was an order to the world, to the system he controlled. It was a command to the police, to the DA, to the media. Strip him of everything, bury him under the full weight of the law. Erase him from the story, leaving only the neat, tidy narrative of a lone, greedy killer. He was no longer Marcus Thorne, future son-in-law of a billionaire. He was just a loose end. And the Davenports always tied up their loose ends. The words "finish him" hung in the air, colder and harder than the steel of the table. For Marcus, it was the sound of his own eulogy. He watched as Detective Harding, though momentarily taken aback by Alistair's audacity, quickly regained his composure. Harding might have been a pawn in a larger game, but he was still the one who would put the king in checkmate. "Marcus Thorne," Harding said, his voice ringing with official authority, "you are under arrest for the murder of Amelia Vance and her unborn child." The handcuffs felt like ice against his wrists. As he was led from the room, he passed Alistair Davenport. There was no acknowledgement, no final glance. To Alistair, Marcus had already ceased to exist. He was simply an asset being liquidated. The trial was a spectacle, orchestrated from start to finish by the Davenport machine. The embezzlement narrative was flawless. Fabricated documents appeared, showing Marcus funneling millions from a Davenport subsidiary into his own offshore accounts. Witnesses, all loyal Davenport employees, gave tearful testimony about his greed and deception. Amelia was recast as his tragic accomplice, a woman who wanted out and threatened to expose him, paying for her moment of conscience with her life. Her journal, once the key to his motive, was now twisted to fit the new story. Her fears were not of a controlling lover, but of a criminal partner she could no longer trust. Marcus's own lawyers, paid for by Alistair, mounted a defense that was theatrical in its ineptitude. They argued weakly, failed to challenge the prosecution's flimsy financial evidence, and painted their own client as a flawed but ultimately non-violent man who had made terrible mistakes. They never once mentioned the money laundering scheme Amelia had discovered. They never once suggested Alistair Davenport had a motive far greater than Marcus's. The key evidence remained the K9 alert and the chemical trace on his collar. It was irrefutable. It placed him in a physical struggle with Amelia moments before her death. Coupled with the mountain of fabricated evidence of his financial crimes, the jury had no choice. He was found guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. From his prison cell, Marcus watched the world move on. A month after his conviction, Victoria Davenport gave a televised interview. She was poised, heartbroken, a survivor. She spoke of the man she thought she knew, the terrible betrayal, and her family's strength in the face of tragedy. She announced the formation of a charitable foundation in Amelia Vance's name, dedicated to helping single mothers. It was a masterstroke of public relations. The Davenport name was not just cleared, it was sanctified. Years passed. The grey walls of the prison became Marcus's world. The arrogance that had defined him was stripped away, layer by layer, by the brutal, monotonous reality of his existence. He was left with nothing but time to replay that single, impulsive moment on the stairs. He had pushed Amelia not just to save his engagement, but to preserve his place in a world of power he had so desperately craved. He had acted as a loyal soldier for an empire that had discarded him the moment he became inconvenient. He had traded 2 lives for a kingdom, only to be exiled to a dungeon. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Chloe Sanders stood before a simple granite headstone that read, "Amelia Vance and her son, beloved and remembered." She placed a small bouquet of white lilies on the grass. The trial had been a perversion of justice, a lie broadcast to the world. She knew Marcus was guilty of the act, but she also knew the real villains were walking free, their names etched on university buildings and museum wings instead of a tombstone. She looked up at the sky, a vast, indifferent blue. The Davenports had won. They had used their immense power to shape reality, to turn a murder into a business transaction. They had finished Marcus Thorne, but they had not silenced the truth. It lived on in a leather-bound journal locked in an evidence box, in the memory of a best friend, and in the quiet, unyielding conviction that true justice, no matter how long it takes, would one day find its way out of the shadows. The world might have forgotten the real reason Amelia died, but Chloe never would. And she would spend the rest of her life waiting for the day the Davenport empire finally paid its own debts.